evening and welcome to AVP TV and Radio. My name is Tchiyiwe Chihana, and in studio with me today is Dr. Mordecai Ogada, who is a Kenyan carnivore ecologist and conservation policy scholar. He's got over 20 years experience in conservation practice in Kenya and other parts of Africa. So we're going to be talking to him about his work and also an upcoming event that he will be at in collaboration with the Center for Equity and Inclusion on the 15th of May. So welcome to the show, Dr. Ogada.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. What is a conservation ecologist to start with?
A conservation ecologist is someone who looks at the relationship between various species and the ecosystem and people, with a view to sort of sorting out the problems or the friction between them to make them coexist better. I mean, and humans are the most important, because humans are the only ones who we can talk to and understand each other and change behavior. So it's mostly making humans understand how to live with the natural heritage that includes the forest, includes the wildlife species, and the environment and resources that they share, including water, space, grass, food, etc. So it's a complicated, it's a complicated career.
It's a complicated career, and I suppose it sounds like it's very close to your heart, based on some of the content I've read about you. So, what is it that you do then, Dr. Ogada, on a practical level? What do you do?
Yeah, on a practical level now, I'm less of an ecologist now in terms of the biology. I'm more of a policy scholar. So I advise on policy, natural resource management policy, keeping people's rights to their natural resources that they live with. Because in Africa, we still have a huge proportion of our population who live off the land, so to speak, use water from the nearby river, use wood fuel from the nearby forest, collect medicinal plants in the nearby forest, do beekeeping in the nearby forest, graze their animals on the nearby grassland. So we have a lot of that direct usage of ecosystem services. But because of that, conservation has become a big violator of natural resource rights, because we keep having this primitive conservation tool called protected areas, where we fence off certain areas and purport to keep people out to protect these areas and keep them for wildlife alone. And we end up violating these people's rights to water, grass, space to move, etc. So that's what that's what I work on most now, the human rights dimension to it, the human dimension of conservation, and particularly with view to keeping the indigenous people's rights intact.
That's very interesting, hey? So let's talk, I would like to get more into that, because you will be on a Zoom event in collaboration with Tete Mausse, who is a postgraduate student. And Tete will be talking about her research, which is on access to water. And you will be talking about structural racism underpinning conservation, and particularly in Kenya. What is the context? How does structural racism underpin conservation?
Structural racism is very closely intertwined into conservation, particularly in reference to Africa, because Africa, because of the megafauna we have, the diversity and abundance of our wildlife, has been very attractive in terms of conservation content. And I'm talking about movies, artwork, books, etc. over many years, over maybe 150 years, and tourism as well. So the structural racism comes into the propaganda that's been normalized, that African wildlife, today the propaganda is African wildlife is in peril, the source of danger is Black people. The only hope for wildlife lies in white people.
Right. Okay.
Very coarsely put, that's what it is. But you see how this came from both stories told about African wildlife, even fictional stories like Tarzan.
Yeah.
Tarzan is this white man in the middle of some place in Africa with all these wild animals, and there's no Black people around. And that propaganda is very powerful. That came up in 1912, I think the first Tarzan book came out. But even if you move up to contemporary times, recently Jane Goodall, in her biography, actually said she was inspired by Tarzan, which is a most bizarre thing to say.
The most
And
bizarre,
even,
yeah.
Even most recent times, you find movies like The Lion King. You have all these in the African savannah with African animals, and they're all speaking in American voices.
Right. Yeah.
This is all very powerful propaganda. So the structural racism in conservation is, particularly in Africa, is very harmful because of how normal it's become. People don't even see it anymore.
Take us back. I think you have discussed elsewhere how the historical context of what we consider conservation now. Could you take us back into how that was shaped? Because that is very much a Western concept in the way we currently do it. Could you take us back to that?
Yeah, the historical perspective is basically what came from Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt big tour to Africa. It was actually in Kenya in 1910, 11. And he killed thousands of species, but it was called a biological collection, scientific expedition. And the idea was that this is this romantic place with these huge megafauna that are so enjoyable. For some reason, Westerners enjoy killing wildlife for recreation. So that it's very important to keep this wildlife intact in certain areas so that white people can enjoy it, can enjoy either looking at it, photographing it, or shooting it. But the key thing is you need to keep Black people out of the given areas. And this was the basis of the National Parks Ordinance, which was put into place particularly in former British colonies in Africa. So these fenced areas, first of all, are unnatural, but they created the paradigm that to save African wildlife, Black people need to be excluded from a certain area.
And given that Black people are already existing with these wildlife, and that would
yes,
that's really ironic.
Yes, it's a huge fallacy, because Kenya, where I come from, is widely acknowledged by science to be the cradle of mankind. As in, mankind evolved from some place in northern Kenya. So we've been here for maybe 1 million years.
And coexisting with these animals.
And suddenly in 2024, you're told we are a problem to the wildlife. And this is science, and the science, and I'd put that in quotes because conservation science has racism interwoven into it. In that it's commonly spoken that human populations in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, are a danger to wildlife populations. It's always said. The Prince of Wales is famous for saying it all the time. Yet the population density of Kenya is less than that of the UK.
Right.
And we still have our megafauna. So this paradigm has become accepted, and it's led to the structural prejudices that make even well-meaning people, I assume well-meaning people, contribute money for the displacement of Africans from their homelands to make room for wildlife. This is often done with great amounts of violence, like what's been seen in northern Tanzania, around Ngorongoro. Even the parks in Kenya, many were created obviously 1960s, 1940s, 50s, and 60s. But people were forcibly rejected. And even in this day and age, We all have these human rights norms that even criminal suspects are arrested and subjected to due process, taken to court, etc. But you still find that our wildlife rangers do not carry handcuffs, they carry guns. They're not out there to arrest anybody. So if you're seen walking across Lake Nakuru National Park or someplace where there's rhinos or some endangered species, you're likely to get shot on sight.
You're likely to get killed.
Yeah, you're likely to get killed.
How? Yeah, I see that. I hear that. I think this is the thing. We exist in a world where we are less sensitive to that kind of thinking, and I think the whole idea of tourism, the economy relying on tourism, has also kind of fostered a blind spot, I suppose, if you will.
Yes, exactly. And this romanticism is the problem, because like those extrajudicial killings, they're often actually celebrated. They're often celebrated as good deeds. Tourism is romanticized as this thing that supports our economy. If you look at the nitty-gritty of it, the money from tourism, the bulk of money from tourism goes to tourism investors, as the guy who owned the hotel, the guy who owns the airlines, the shipping lines, and the to local people actually earn very little from tourism. And this is the thing, that tourism is so romanticized as being so important to so many people. And many tourists actually even come thinking that their visits to this country save the wildlife. And that's one myth I can dispel right away. No tourists. Tourists, you're also welcome to come to Kenya, but come to enjoy yourself, but you're not saving anything. That elephant would exist without you. And it will be fine without you, whether you come or not. So come enjoy it, but don't put the savior hat on. Don't think you're saving anything by coming. And you saw all the press around the world say that, oh, there'll be a huge loss of wildlife during the COVID pandemic because tourism went down. Actually, the wildlife thrived because there was less disturbance.
The wildlife thrived during the height of the pandemic. Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely did. Wow. How would you, Dr. Ogada, let's say, here you are, Dr. Ogada, you take responsibility for visioning how we do conservation, or how humans, and I think I like that you said the indigenous population, how we interact with how would you do it?
I think first of all, if we talk about protected areas, I wouldn't go around, I wouldn't go about dismantling the protected area network that we have. Because first of all, the people who are ejected from there, most of them, we don't even know them. So we wouldn't know who to give the land. And those protected areas are part of our history, etc. But first thing, I would not create a single new protected area. I would not do that. And what I would do is seek to ensure connectivity, as in sort of corridors, for lack of a better term, between wildlife habitats, so we can have free movement of wildlife, cyclic movements of wildlife, people and their livestock around our rangelands. Free movement, because that movement is what makes the whole system sustainable. If you even fence in wildlife, like for example, we fence in elephants in a given place, they'll trash it. And we know this from ecology, but you find ecologists are actually building fences. So there's a dishonesty there. And then I'd look also at human livelihoods. How can we make our livelihoods compatible with sharing this habitat with wildlife? Like if you're in a wildlife area and there's elephants around, you probably shouldn't be planting maize.
Right.
Because they come and eat it. You could do cattle ranching or goat or sheep or camel ranching, because that would not come into conflict with the elephant population. And then with that you could develop ways of taking care, extra vigilance, protective structures to take care of your cattle so that lions don't get into them. and that kind of thing, and keep the cycles going, keep your livestock moving around so that the grass has time to recover from grazing, so that the wildlife can also partake of it, and also keep water sources clean, and clean so that they can be used by people, livestock, and wildlife, that kind of thing. Don't fence water sources, this kind of thing. So it's a complex suite of methods, and it is necessarily complex because ecosystems are complex by nature, and it's very primitive to use a childlike solution like fencing for conservation. I mean, that was cutting edge back when they were building the Great Wall of China, and that's when fencing was in vogue. But we're still doing it now, sadly. Yeah.
Right. I think so. What are you in the policy space? Because that's what you are doing. Whom are you speaking to? Is it just Kenya, but also how are you interacting with policymakers themselves, lawmakers actually, when it comes to your ideas?
Okay. First of all, the policy advice work, I do it many places around the world. I do it within part of the UN system. I advise an international rights group called Survival International, which works all over the world with indigenous people's rights. And mostly I work in the NGO space. The government space, I've managed to get this advice into US government, especially talking about USAID funded projects. But talking about my country, Kenya, it's still been very difficult. Kenya is sort of the imperialist's dream. We are such an imperialist country. We still think tourism is the reason why we conserve our wildlife. That's why we even, in our government, we even have a very strange ministry called Ministry of Tourism and Wildlife. Yet tourism is just a byproduct of conservation, not the reason for conservation. So it's still very difficult. Kenya's policy is still stuck in sort of mid-20th century when the colonial government was at its height.
So what then is happening with your attempts to engage then? Because it sounds like you're not winning. What is happening then?
I've engaged a number of very senior people in government and presented memoranda and my views to them, but they I wouldn't say they ignore it, but they are more inclined to believe the romantic stories told to them by WWF and the Nature Conservancy, and more so because all these international conservation organizations come with promises to help. We've come to save you, so we've come with money. And the government, immediately they hear someone's bringing money. When Mordecai is bringing just ideas, it's like he's bringing work. When someone's bringing money, well, he's bringing fun and happiness.
Quite recently, so I'm Zambian. Quite recently, we had you talk about a recent debt restructuring. Is it carbon offsets, asset offsets? Yeah. I wanted to hear a little bit more about that, and especially now that you're talking about imperialist approach to things. And also, apart from Zambia, you've also highlighted another country. Could it be Liberia that you spoke of?
Yeah. It's quite widespread. Zambia took it on a big way. Liberia, sort of relative to the size of the country, sort of the hugest, the biggest sort of carbon offset program has been in the Seychelles, with the Nature Conservancy. So let me just put it this way: carbon credits and carbon offsets, carbon trading, it's a scam. It's not partly a scam. It's like 100% a scam. It is basically.
I'm sure what people want to hear more about that. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's some people, someplace polluting the environment, polluting a river, polluting the air or whatever. And then they're handing over money to some middleman broker. These middlemen brokers are the conservation organizations. The Nature Conservancy is a big one, Conservation International. also does the same thing, but the Nature Conservancy is probably the biggest one. So they pay the Nature Conservancy money, and the Nature Conservancy goes through various chicanery and strange agreements. They go and secure land in Kenya or Zambia or somewhere else, and keep people out of this land. And once they've kept people out of that land, they keep people from cultivating it, grazing it, developing it in any way for their livelihoods. And in return for that, they report on the carbon sequestered in that land. They report, they sell that idea to Netflix, Meta, Google, any of these big carbon footprint companies. And so Meta, instead of making their operations, and Meta is actually one of the biggest buyers of carbon credits from Kenya. So instead of making their operations more environmentally friendly, they continue polluting, but just pay money to the Nature Conservancy. And the Nature Conservancy is happy. They're getting money for nothing. Meta is happy because they can continue polluting and making money. The only loser is the community in Kenya or Zambia or wherever. We're told now suddenly you can't cultivate this land. And they're told some agreement that you'll get some money, but the key thing to understand here is the money never comes.
It never comes. What do you mean it never comes?
The millions of dollars paid by Meta end up in the Nature Conservancy or the conservation organization. They never get to those.
To the people that are displaced and the populations. Okay.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Why are we not hearing much about this way of seeing things actually? What is it?
The thing is, conservation now all over the world has invested millions of dollars in propaganda, PR, communications, call it advertising, call it what you want. But they literally drown out any questions over what they're doing. I mean, you will not find a person anyway.
When we're hearing, when we're talking about the climate and ecological crisis, for example, is that what you would consider framing that is heavily paid for? It's got big PR budgets. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, and it's important for your listeners to hear this at the outset. The world is in an environmental crisis. Pollution, loss of biodiversity, all that's a real problem. But if you look at the framing, if you look at the framing of the story, who's damaging the environment? The media always points to African countries who are not industrialized, don't have nuclear power, don't have anything. You look at how much press
and less responsible. They've got minimal, less than 5% responsibility.
Their carbon footprint is minuscule. Look at how much press right now how much is being reported in the press right now that's turning the spotlight for pollution to African herds of livestock. Not Western nuclear power plants, not Western factories, not Western the millions of automobiles in the West, etc. The huge machinery, military industrial complex in the West is now being ignored, and they're now targeting cows and goats in Africa. In Africa,
specifically.
And specifically, and that's what these guys are paying for. That's what the conservation organizations are paying for. Because you create a crisis narrative in Africa, suddenly there's need for a savior in Africa, and suddenly there's money to fund a savior in Africa. And that's how it's a business that continues like that. And sadly, even academia keeps the wheels going by the sort of material that's published in peer-reviewed journals, the sort of materials that's taught in universities, and the sort of materials that's shared at conferences. You'd never think Africa is the place in the world that has the most diverse and abundant natural heritage.
Yeah, right. This is really interesting. So you've got this event that you are going to be speaking at with Tete. Tete is focusing on
Yeah.
water resources. Have you had any time to engage with Tete's work, and what should people be expecting that?
Yes. I've looked at her work, and she's covering what is a very important issue, that one that has sort of been flying under the radar, is the privatization of water resources all over Africa by the Nature Conservancy, by the way. They've done it in Nairobi, they've done it in Cape Town, they've done it in a number of different places. Right. So they sort of claim to be funding conservation in the watersheds, but they basically restrict community use of water. So all the water ends up in fenced reservoirs.
Right.
Fenced reservoirs and pipe. Like in Kenya, what's happening is that we've created tunnels. Water's diverted from streams and rivers into tunnels that brings it straight to Nairobi, where it's paid. And the people who have financed this thing are big water users like Coca-Cola, Diageo, which is a big drinks
company,
drinks manufacturer, etc. And they end up getting concessionary water rates for their factories, but everyone else pays premium rates, and the local people from where the water comes from do not have access to that. Like his goat can't go and drink water there. And this sort of privatization is what's going on, and it's a big political problem. Our leaders around Africa don't seem to see it, but there will be trouble further down the line. It's all fine now because we're having good rainy season, but when climate change kicks in, droughts and all that, there will be trouble.
Actually, I should have recognized that you had floods in Kenya and some lives have been lost in the last week.
Right now it's raining pretty heavy.
It's raining quite a lot. So that event on the 15th of May is called Confronting the Colonial Grip on Africa's Natural Resources. It's a very powerful title. What grip does it have? What grip does
the grip that it has? I mean, from my perspective, is the narrative we've been talking about, the conservation narrative. The blacks are the bad people. The white people are the saviors. The grip of that narrative, whether in animated movies, documentaries, you see like David Attenborough's documentaries, there's so much about African wildlife, but you never see a black person on there. It's there. He doesn't tell any lie, but he lets the camera lie for him. And that propaganda, a lot of it is subliminal. And another thing that I'm going to talk about is also keeping the narrative, the propaganda, strictly, keeping all academic publications, peer review publications in line with the propaganda. The sort of things I'm telling you now would not be published in any peer review journal.
No, because there's a narrative there that you're veering off of, which is, and this is why we say, I think the reason we try so hard to create these platforms is because our stories are constantly told by somebody else rather than ourselves. And
yes,
I think
and our stories are kept out of the mainstream. I mean, personally, I made a decision a few years ago. I stopped submitting. I don't submit to peer review journals. I keep getting invited to do so now, but I don't, because I think they're an apartheid system. It's a simple fact. So I find my own platforms, whether it's monologues, whether it's interviews like this, whether it's writing in popular press, or writing books, or writing my own blogs, because that's where our stories get told. If you get into peer review journals, suddenly I'm telling a story about what's going on with the river down the road here from my home, and I submit it to a journal, and some guy sitting in Nebraska reviewing it and deciding what should be deleted or not. How is he my peer?
Wow.
If we are talking about Mount Kenya forest, how is that guy in Winnipeg in Canada? How is he my peer?
How is that your peer?
Yeah, I live here and he's sitting over there. And so that system also needs to change. And it's a challenge for universities now. They need to find some other way because what we've been doing so far is not working.
It's not working. Yeah. So, Dr. Ogada, or Mordecai, as you have asked to be called, do you envision a scenario in which the African Union could probably take responsibility and take ownership of some of these activities and say, because we're talking about we've looked after our animals, we've looked after our natural resources, from time immemorial. Is there a way the African Union itself could take it upon themselves to start demanding, I think, that we do things differently and we take back control? Goodness, I sound like Trump.
Yeah.
But we take back control of our resources.
We have a bit of a stumbling block because if you look at the sort of wildlife, if you can call it wildlife, part of the African Union discussion, of the African Union platform, it's called the African Union International Bureau of Animal Resources. Now, this bureau existed before the formation of the African Union. It was a colonial government bureau looking at livestock production in Africa, the introduction
and that's still in existence within the AU now?
Yes. So this thing jumped from colonialism into the independent AU. So I don't think it's capable. It's still Western controlled completely. It's headquartered in Nairobi, actually.
Right.
And the problem is that the mainstream African Union, we are very the African Union has very strong secretariat and voices on politics, military, trade, diplomacy, etc. But you realize that natural resources, natural heritage, wildlife, water, etc. There's no desk that talks about it.
Dedicated
there's a gap.
it.
There's a gap there at the African Union, which is a huge problem because
So
right now the West is really targeting. Yeah. Sorry?
Where is the concerted space then for African countries to really do something about this then?
I think the space is the space currently exists at it's not at national level, it's at local. Yeah, it's a more at local level. Like it's time for people in Africa, and many places in Africa people have started doing this. It's like, we live here, this is our river.
Absolutely, yes.
You're not gonna come here and you won't do anything here unless we let you. We will tell you what
happening.
Yeah,
that's happening.
Yeah, there's a number of places where this is our river, this is our forest, this is our lake, this is our rangeland, and I think that sentiment is there. And what scholars and other people need to do now is improve the knowledge of those people on why you shouldn't let someone dam your river, or you shouldn't let someone extract water from your river, and the consequences of all that, and the way to negotiate with people. Someone who wants to come and maybe, build a tourism lodge or whatever in your home area, you improve their capacity to handle such agreements. You tell him, like, okay, you can build a lodge, but we are not going to stop grazing anywhere. You can build a lodge, but you're not going to build it near the spring where we water our livestock, because we have to use that water. You can extract water from there, but you want to build the lodge there. Right now, there's very little capacity to handle such agreements, and these conservation organizations are in the business of just corrupting leadership all the way from the top to the bottom.
And especially, I'm sure also that question of empowered communities rather than empowering, but empowered communities is also influenced, I suppose, by those investors and what they say they're bringing to that table, and so probably making it more challenging, I think, for such decisions to be made locally, right?
Yeah, they've sort of presumed to start telling us what the empowerment is. Yeah, and it's very strange because they create this empowerment that is not really empowerment. I think what really empowers, one thing I know that's really empowered communities is like what we are doing now, having these interviews, and now the price of smartphones has gone down, so people are able to see this stuff. I think
access to information,
social media and all that, and stuff like my monologues. I'm talking to a number of people around to see if we can have some people do voiceovers of what I'm saying, do it in Maasai language, or whatever other language, so people can understand what I'm saying, or do it even in French for some of the francophone parts of Africa, parts of the world. And I'm talking to some people do it voiceovers in Spanish for people to access this material in South America, South and Central America as well. So that communication it's like there's a truth that can go around. So if WWF comes and tells you something, you can go and check it, background check it, fact check it, or you can ask them, but no, I heard this and that, so and so said you guys are doing this and that. What do you have to say about that? So there's the communication it's changing things a lot. It really is changing things a lot. And the fact that I can talk to you here, I don't have to get an interview on BBC. I can talk to you here and people will hear my voice. And that kind of thing. So
and you're also guaranteed that the people who will be accessing these are the people who are most impacted, actually, which is good. I think.
I can just share a link and say, this is what it is.
Dr. Ogada, I wondered what your thoughts were on. So there's a big movement towards the rights of nature at the moment. So like rights of the river, I think it's happened in Canada before, where they get, like you give legal personhood, not give because you can't really give, but you accord a legal personhood to a river, for example. What are your thoughts around that shift?
I think that it's not surprising that that sort of thing is starting in Canada, which is a settler colony. They're needing to do that because they're a settler colony and they don't have spiritual connection to these rivers or lakes. In Africa, we do. So we don't have to create that. We've got it.
Because that's what it is, isn't it? Like we exist alongside. We are part of it rather than it being an isolation to us. We are part of it. Yeah.
And I think what they are creating is it might pass like a sort of fad, because its spiritual connection is almost impossible to create. It's just there. I mean, and that's the distinct difference between African societies and societies in so many other parts of the world. African people never immigrated from anywhere to this place. We originated here. So those spiritual connections are millennia
inherent.
They're just inherent. I don't know if it's something you can teach. I know the Native Americans, the First Nation people, even in Canada, they have those connections. But I don't think the Canadian government can create them. I mean, I'd be happy if they could.
Yeah.
I'd be happy if they could, but I'm very skeptical about how spiritual connections can be created by law or by documents. There's no document that's created the spiritual connection that people in Zimbabwe have to the Victoria Falls or that kind of thing. That they just have
could you say Zambia, and could you call it the Mossi Otunya Falls, please?
Yes, exactly. The people
we have
in
a
Zambia
big fight between Zambia and Zimbabwe.
Mossi Otunya Falls, and that spiritual connection, you couldn't create it because it's also been there. And we have the same problem in the Western Kenya where I come from. We have what is called Lake Victoria because and we can't get consensus because it's shared between 3 countries, and someone called it Victoria, but we call it Namlolwe in the Luo language in Kenya. But we have that spiritual connection, and it can't be created.
Right.
The people who live around Mount Kenya, the Kikuyu, Embu, Meru people, and Tharaka people who live around Mount Kenya, they have all sorts of sacred sites there. They go for prayers. You couldn't create that if these people were immigrants from somewhere.
No, yeah, you couldn't create that.
Really,
Tell us a bit about your book as well. You co-authored a book. Oh, I'm sorry. I think we had a bit of a break in connection there, but maybe did you hear that question? I was asking about your book.
Yeah. The big conservation lie. It's a book co-authored with John Barrier, he's also Kenyan. He's a conservation writer. He's a journalist, and he'd done a lot of writing on conservation, and I'd seen a lot of these problems in conservation practice, and we got to meet at a time when there was a fence being built across Laikipia, where I live in Kenya. And it was, Laikipia has a lot of wildlife, so it was supported by NGOs to a fence to build purportedly to separate elephant habitats from villages and farmlands, etc. And Barrier wrote about it, and he called it the fence to separate the haves and the have-nots.
Oh, wow.
Because the elephant habitats were largely in wealthy white-owned ranches, and the villages, farmlands were mostly where the indigenous people live. And if you looked at the fence, it did separate the haves and the have-nots. So we got to talking and started questioning some of these things, and we decided to get together and share our experiences and put it together in a book. So that book is basically a compilation of my experiences and Barrier's experiences. We actually didn't need to do any external research for any of the stuff in that book. The fallout from the book was pretty immediate. It was published 2017, launched 2017, January rather. We couldn't find a local publisher to publish it, so it was published in the United States because no publisher in Kenya wanted to deal with the subject. And after it was published, I got pretty much ostracized from the conservation community. Barrier also suffered a lot of backlash. People were calling it a book of lies. They called it a racist book, etc. So 2017, 2018, we were pretty much pariahs. But
and when they called it a racist book, what was the context of that? Racism against whom?
They said it's a book against white people. And because there are certain the propaganda we've talked about with you, is so strong. It's so strong that you can speak up against almost anybody or anything. Especially in Kenya, we have freedom of speech. You can even criticize the president if you need to. But to criticize white people, if you say something against white people in conservation, that's like anathema. So the fallout was.
I have been hearing quite a bit of this, a similar context actually, not just in Kenya, but also in Zambia, where you hear of opposition, like a clique of people that live in conservation areas that would fight tooth and nail, and predominantly white people, fight tooth and nail for any Zambian to get the license to also
to do what they're doing.
So I have heard similar contexts then. So this is something that is replicated everywhere.
Yes, and especially in the former British colonies, because as the world is today, imperialism has been dying, has been crumbling for many decades, but its one strong remaining pillar is conservation.
Right.
Once the Prince of Wales could not come and tell Kenya government anything about agriculture, education, business, or anything. But when it's conservation, he comes and pontificates and we listen. Because that is imperialism's last remaining pillar. It's still the one thing where we think outsiders know better than us.
Right.
Or the one thing we think we do for outsiders.
So these are
That's why it's so hard. That's why that license thing you're talking about is no one will fight a Zambian wanting to open a petrol station.
No.
Or wanting to open a supermarket. No one will fight you.
But
you want to open a hunting lodge or a safari lodge, then there's a problem.
I was going to say we should end here, but as you're speaking, I've just remembered the question that I think I'm interested in. How rife is trophy hunting in Africa now? That's quite big business, isn't it? So animals are trophies. Sorry.
Yeah, trophy hunting. Okay, we don't have it in Kenya, but we have it. Kenya is an exception that in that particular.
Oh, you do
respect.
not have it in Kenya. Interesting.
No. Trophy hunting, the amounts of money earned from trophy hunting by the respective governments are not significant. It's like the paradigm of tourism. The people who really earn money, serious money, are the safari outfitters.
Yeah.
The guys who organize the whole thing. They're the guys who really earn money. Trophy hunting, why it's so sort of guarded by the people who do it, because it's an exercise in white supremacy.
Right.
And so it's not about shooting that buffalo or elephant. It's the fact that the place where you go to shoot at that buffalo or elephant, no black person is allowed to live there.
And these are huge, huge pieces of land. I mean, yeah.
If someone comes and says we are shooting, even shooting birds or anything, if we are coming to do any shooting around here, it means Mordecai can't live here for safety or whatever reason. No. So it's a supremacist thing. That's what they work so hard to protect. That's why trophy hunting it's an almost revered thing.
Right.
And that's why when we are talking of elephants,
it's very exclusive. You're right.
Very exclusive, very revered, very elitist.
Very elitist,
and very imperialist.
And very damaging.
Yeah.
I have to say.
Yeah. So you hear all the conservation organizations talking about, so many elephants are killed by poachers every year, but not a word about those killed by trophy hunters.
No.
They say poachers kill so many lions every year, but not a word about those killed by trophy hunters. And that's why when we talk of losses of wildlife, we talk of conflict with local people, poaching, all these other things with black people, but we never talk about the hundreds and hundreds that are killed by white people.
That descend on the continent. Yeah. And we have hundreds of people descending on the continent in countries where you have trophy hunting just exclusively to do that. Come in, jet out, and that's it. Dr. Ogada,
you go to Namibia, it's the biggest thing. All foreign tourists at the airport have got guns.
Yeah. Dr. Ogada, I feel like we could talk forever, but we're going to be listening to you on the 15th of May as part of this conversation with Tete Mausse, Confronting the Colonial Grip on Africa's Natural Resources. This is in partnership with the Center for Equity and Inclusion at the University of Sheffield. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to the further conversations on the 15th.